Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always fun.
Today, we're going on a journey through the Book of Deuteronomy,
Oh, wow.
a fascinating text from the Hebrew Bible.
Absolutely.
We're going to be exploring how this ancient book tackles the concepts of justice and fairness.
Okay.
And we've brought in some excerpts from scholarly commentary
Sounds good.
to guide us along the way.
Very exciting.
So buckle up, because we're about to uncover how these ancient ideas might still have relevance for us today.
It really is remarkable how a text from thousands of years ago can still spark such relevant conversations.
It is.
Yeah,
Justice just seems like such a massive topic.
it is a huge topic.
Where do we even begin unpacking that in the context of Deuteronomy?
Well, the Hebrew word tzedek is a great starting point.
Okay.
Often translated as righteousness, it's more about fairness and aligning with God's expectations for behavior.
Interesting. So tzedek is like the foundation for understanding how justice operates in Deuteronomy.
It's exactly. It's
Yeah.
set the standard that informs everything from personal conduct to legal judgments.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that it's not just some abstract ideal.
Right.
Tzedek is meant to be woven into the fabric of everyday life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does this concept of tzedek play out in specific situations, like when it comes to dealing with enemies?
Okay.
For instance, Deuteronomy has those intense conquest narratives,
Right.
those battles against kings like Og of Bashan and Sihon of the Amorites.
Yeah, some really tough stuff.
Those are pretty hard-hitting,
Yeah.
especially for a modern reader.
Yeah, they're definitely some of the more challenging passages to grapple with.
Right.
But the commentary explains these battles through the lens of holy war,
Okay.
a concept central to the ancient Israelite worldview.
So they believed God was directly involved in these conflicts.
Yeah, acting as a divine judge.
Interesting. So the victories were seen as a vindication of God's justice.
Precisely.
Wow.
But even within those narratives, there are intriguing nuances. For example, Deuteronomy sometimes commands the Israelites to spare women and children.
That's a really interesting detail.
Yeah.
It suggests that even amidst the harsh realities of war, there's an attempt to grapple with different levels of culpability.
Exactly. It
Mhm.
challenges us to consider how even within a framework of divine judgment,
Yeah.
there's a recognition of certain individuals who might not deserve the full force of that judgment.
So it highlights the complexities of applying justice, even in what seems like a straightforward situation.
Totally.
I mean, this idea of holy war is definitely a far cry from how most people view warfare today.
It certainly raises some challenging questions about the evolution of our understanding of justice
Right.
and the role of religion in shaping those understandings.
Yeah, and speaking of how tzedek is woven into everyday life,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy is also packed with laws,
It is.
many of which directly address social justice.
Absolutely. One that stands out is the law of debt release every 7 years,
Okay.
found in Deuteronomy 15.
Oh.
Just imagine every 7 years, all debts between fellow Israelites were completely wiped clean.
Wow, that's a radical concept.
It is.
It must have had a massive impact on their society.
Huge.
I wonder what the economic and social implications of such a system would be if applied today.
It's fascinating to consider. Isn't it that commentary points out that this practice wasn't just about financial fairness.
Okay.
It was about preventing perpetual poverty among God's chosen people
Right.
and ensuring a certain level of economic security.
It seems like there's a real concern for preventing the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few.
Right. However, there is a distinction made between debts owed by fellow Israelites
Okay.
and those owed by foreigners.
Gotcha.
Debts from foreigners were still to be collected.
That's interesting. So there's kind of a built-in inequality there.
It is a reminder that even in a system striving for justice,
Yeah.
there can be inherent biases and limitations.
Absolutely. It makes you think about whose interests are being served, even in systems that present themselves as fair and just. So what other laws in Deuteronomy point to this concern for social justice?
Well, there are rules about fair treatment of servants and slaves,
Okay.
protecting widows, orphans, and foreigners.
Hmm.
In Deuteronomy 24, there's even a law against using different weights and measures in business transactions.
Wow. They thought of everything.
It seems so.
It seems like they really were trying to create a system that ensured fairness across all aspects of life.
It does speak to a genuine desire to establish a just society,
Yeah.
at least within the framework of their own understanding.
And it's amazing how those same concerns resonate with us today.
They do.
We're still grappling with those issues of fairness, equality, and how to protect the most vulnerable members of society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Deuteronomy offers us a window into how one ancient culture grappled with those challenges.
Yeah.
It certainly raises a lot of questions,
It does.
but it also provides some food for thought
Right.
as we continue to navigate these complexities ourselves.
Absolutely. And speaking of thought-provoking concepts,
I would-
what about those cities of refuge?
Oh, yeah.
They sound fascinating.
They were incredibly important.
Okay.
If someone accidentally killed another person,
Mm-hmm.
they could flee to one of these designated cities and find sanctuary.
Interesting.
This protected them from the blood avenger.
Wait, blood avenger?
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, in ancient Israel, if someone was killed, a family member, often the closest male relative,
Okay.
was obligated to avenge that death.
Oh, wow.
This was seen as upholding justice.
Wow. So the cities of refuge offered a way to mitigate this system,
Yeah.
recognizing that not all killings were intentional.
Exactly.
So these cities were like a way of tempering justice with mercy.
Precisely, Deuteronomy 19 lays out the specifics and even designates 6 specific cities for this purpose.
Wow.
The person who committed the accidental killing had to remain in the city until the death of the high priest.
Until the death of the high priest.
Yeah.
That's such a specific and curious detail.
It is.
What was the thinking behind that?
It's hard to say for certain,
Okay.
but some scholars suggest it might symbolize a period of atonement or spiritual cleansing.
Interesting.
The death of the high priest, the most significant religious figure,
Yeah.
could have represented a point of reconciliation.
It seems like even the seemingly practical laws in Deuteronomy
Yeah.
could have deeper symbolic meaning.
Exactly, and it reminds us that these texts are multi-layered.
Right.
There's always more to uncover.
Always more to uncover. I love it. It's so interesting, the idea that the death of the high priest could symbolize a fresh start.
It really is.
It makes you wonder if those ancient Israelites saw justice as something that needed to be constantly renewed or rebalanced. Speaking of rebalancing, we
Yeah.
were talking before about how some of Deuteronomy's laws protected vulnerable,
Right.
like those who were in debt.
Yeah.
But then there's also this whole other set of laws about family matters.
Right.
And those can be pretty intense too.
Yeah, it's true. Those laws offer a fascinating glimpse into the family dynamics of ancient Israel.
Right.
Deuteronomy 21 in particular has some passages that really spark debate,
Yes.
like the one about the rebellious son.
Right. The punishment described for a son who disobeys his parents is incredibly harsh by today's standards.
Definitely.
What do you think this tells us about the values and anxieties of ancient Israelite society?
Well, in that patriarchal society, respect for parents wasn't just good manners.
Yeah.
It was seen as essential for maintaining order.
Right.
A rebellious son was considered a threat to the stability of the family unit,
Right.
which had ripple effects throughout the community.
So the severity of the punishment was meant to deter that kind of behavior
Yeah,
and reinforce the authority of the parents.
exactly. The commentary highlights how this law reflects a deep concern for social stability
Okay.
and the continuity of family lines.
Makes sense.
Of course, it's a challenging passage to read through a modern lens,
Right.
especially when we consider how much our views on discipline and child development have evolved.
Oh, absolutely. But even within these laws that might seem rigid to us now,
Okay.
there are also some that aim to protect those who are vulnerable.
That's a great observation. Take, for instance, the law of levirate marriage,
Okay.
where a brother is obligated to marry his deceased brother's wife
Yeah.
if she's childless.
Yeah.
While this practice might seem strange to us today,
Oh, yeah.
it was intended to ensure the widow's social and economic security.
That's a really good point. It shows that even within a system that might seem harsh or unforgiving,
Yeah.
there was an underlying concern for the well-being of individuals,
Right.
especially those who might otherwise be left without support.
It's a reminder that these laws weren't simply about punishment or control.
Right.
They're also trying to create a social safety net, albeit within the constraints of their culture and beliefs.
And that's why it's so fascinating to explore these ancient texts.
Absolutely.
It's not about judging them by our own standards,
Right.
but about understanding the web of beliefs and practices that shaped them.
Exactly. And speaking of beliefs, we can't talk about justice in Deuteronomy without talking about the role of prophets.
The prophets.
They were seen as the voice of God calling people back to Sedek when they strayed from the path.
So they were like the guardians of justice, holding people accountable,
Yeah.
even the leaders.
That's a great way to put it. And Deuteronomy is very clear about the dangers of false prophets,
Okay.
those who might lead people astray for personal gain or influence.
So how are people supposed to tell the real deal from a fake printer? It seems like there would be a lot of room for interpretation.
Well, Deuteronomy offers a pretty practical test.
Okay.
Look at their track record.
Okay.
If their prophecies consistently fail to come true, well, they're
Yeah.
probably not speaking for God.
A very results-oriented approach.
Right.
No wiggle room for vague predictions there.
It really emphasizes the importance of truth and accountability, especially for those in positions of authority.
Right.
True prophets weren't just delivering feel-good messages. They were challenging people,
Yeah.
pushing them to live up to a higher standard of justice and righteousness.
It's a pretty powerful message, and it makes you wonder how that applies to how we evaluate leaders and sources of information today.
Definitely.
Are we discerning enough? Are we holding people accountable?
Those are great questions, and I think Deuteronomy challenges us to be critical thinkers,
Okay.
to question assumptions,
Yeah.
and to be wary of anyone claiming to have a monopoly on the truth.
It's a timely reminder for sure.
It is.
So we've talked about Sedek, Holy War social laws, those fascinating cities of refuge,
Right.
family matters,
Yeah.
and the role of prophets.
Yeah, what else about justice stands out in Deuteronomy?
Well, the commentary also dives into those passages about how the Israelites were to conduct themselves in battle.
Okay.
And I think it's worth exploring that a little further.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so those are some of the passages that can be really jarring for modern readers,
Definitely.
especially those commands to completely wipe out certain enemy groups.
Yeah. How do we reconcile that with the idea of a just and merciful God?
It's a tough question,
Yeah.
and one that has been debated by scholars for centuries.
Right.
It's important to remember the historical context.
Okay.
The ancient world was brutal, and warfare was often a matter of survival.
So we're talking about a very different set of circumstances
Yeah.
and a very different worldview than our own.
Precisely. And even within those seemingly harsh commands, there are nuances.
Okay.
For example, there are specific instructions to spare women and children in some instances.
Right, which suggests there was at least some recognition
Yeah.
that not everyone in an enemy group posed the same level of threat.
Exactly. And it's also interesting to note that Deuteronomy distinguishes between different types of enemies,
Okay.
like those living within the Promised Land versus those farther away.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
There were those instructions for offering terms of peace before attacking a city.
That's right. Deuteronomy 20 outlines a process for offering peaceful surrender to a city.
If they accepted, they would become vassals,
Yeah.
but would be spared destruction.
Right.
But if they refused and chose to fight, the rules of engagement changed.
So there was a hierarchy of enemies and different rules applied depending on the situation.
Exactly, and it shows that even in warfare,
Yeah.
there were attempts to establish some kind of order to create a framework for what they considered just conduct.
It's a reminder that even in the most extreme situations, there were still attempts to create boundaries
Right.
and to distinguish between different levels of culpability.
And it's particularly interesting that the harshest commands, those calling for complete annihilation,
Okay.
were reserved for the Canaanite nations, the people already living in the land promised to the Israelites.
It seems like there was a theological justification for that, right?
That's right. Deuteronomy claims that these nations needed to be removed to prevent the Israelites from being corrupted by their religious practices,
Okay.
which were considered abhorrent to God.
It's a stark reminder of how religion and justice were so deeply intertwined for the ancient Israelites.
Absolutely. And it raises some interesting questions about how our own beliefs and values shape our understanding of justice even today.
It makes you wonder if we're always aware of the assumptions and biases we bring to the table when we talk about right and wrong,
Right.
fair and unfair.
It's something to be mindful of for sure.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground how Deuteronomy defines justice, the complexities of holy war,
Yeah.
the importance of truth and accountability,
Right.
the nuances of ancient warfare.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else we should highlight before we move on?
You know, there's one more thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier how Deuteronomy isn't just about rules and regulations.
Yes.
It's about a people wrestling with how to live in right relationship with God and with each other.
Right.
And there's that powerful poem in Deuteronomy 32,
Oh, yeah.
the Song of Moses,
Mhm.
that seems to capture that struggle so well.
That's a great point. The Song of Moses offers such a profound reflection on the relationship between God and Israel.
It really does.
I remember reading it, and it's both beautiful and haunting.
It is.
It starts out as this celebration of God's love and faithfulness,
Right.
recounting how he rescued them from slavery and led them to the promised land.
It's a powerful testament to God's provision and guidance.
But then there's this stark warning
Yeah.
about what will happen if the Israelites abandon God and his laws.
Exactly. Moses predicts that turning away from God will inevitably lead to judgment and suffering.
It's that theme of accountability again.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond that. It's like God is expressing this deep sadness and disappointment over the possibility of his people choosing a path that will ultimately hurt them.
It's a very poignant passage. You can almost hear the heartbreak in God's voice as he contemplates the consequences of their potential choices.
I'd never thought about it that way before.
Hmm.
It's like a parent watching their child make choices they know will lead to pain.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights the tension between justice and mercy that runs throughout Deuteronomy.
Right.
God is just, but he's also deeply merciful.
Yeah.
He wants his people to follow his laws, not because he wants to punish them,
Okay.
but because he knows that obedience will lead to blessing and flourishing.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. It's like justice at its core is rooted in this desire for wholeness and well-being,
Yeah.
both for individuals and for the community as a whole.
And that's a message that transcends the specific cultural context of ancient Israel.
Right.
It's something we can all strive for in our own lives
Right.
and in our own pursuit of justice.
I love how you've brought these ancient texts to life and shown how they still speak to us today. It's really given me a lot to think about.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Deuteronomy might be thousands of years old,
Yeah.
but it's clearly still relevant to the conversations we're having today about justice, fairness,
Right.
and how to create a better world.
I completely agree. And on that note, I think we need to take a moment to let all of this sink in.
Okay.
But don't worry, we'll be back soon for the final part of our deep dive into Deuteronomy.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Deuteronomy.
Yeah, it's been
We've covered so much ground, from Tzedek to holy war, from social laws to the role of prophets.
it's been quite a journey.
It's incredible how this ancient text offers such a multifaceted perspective on justice.
It really does. We've seen how Deuteronomy grapples with these complex issues, often raising more questions than it answers.
That's true, and I think that's part of what makes it so compelling.
Yeah.
It doesn't offer those easy solutions or simplistic pronouncements.
No,
It invites us to kind of wrestle with these timeless questions alongside those who came before us.
it does. It's a reminder that, these aren't new questions. Humans have been grappling with these ideas of justice and fairness for millennia.
So as we wrap up our deep dive,
Okay.
what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listener will walk away with?
Okay.
What makes Deuteronomy relevant today? Well, I hope our listener has gained an appreciation for the nuance and complexity of the concept of justice as presented in Deuteronomy.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Hmm.
It recognizes the complexities of human nature and the challenges of living in a world where things aren't always black and white.
Right. Like those seemingly harsh punishments for certain offenses.
Yeah.
When you first encounter them, they might seem cruel or unjust.
Right.
But when you consider the historical context and the values they were trying to uphold,
Yeah.
a different perspective emerges.
It's essential to approach these ancient texts thoughtfully and critically.
Yeah.
We shouldn't judge them solely by our own modern standards.
Hmm.
Instead, we should try to understand them within their own historical and cultural framework.
So empathy is key here.
Yeah.
The ability to step into the shoes of those who lived in a very different time and place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not just about understanding the past, it's also about recognizing the universal truths that transcend time and culture. Those fundamental principles of justice and fairness that we still strive for today.
So we're looking for both historical context and timeless relevance.
Precisely. And I think another key takeaway is the emphasis on personal responsibility that permeates Deuteronomy.
Oh.
The idea that each individual is accountable for their actions, and those actions have consequences both for themselves and for their community.
We saw that in those laws about making restitution for wrongdoing,
Right.
and those warnings about the dangers of straying from God's path.
Right. And it's a reminder that true justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers.
Yeah.
It's about restoring balance, righting wrongs, and creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So it's not about retribution, it's about restoration and creating a more just world.
Exactly. And that's what makes Deuteronomy so much more than an ancient law code.
Right.
It's a framework for building a just and compassionate society.
A framework that, as we've seen, still has something to offer us today.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a final thought for our listener to ponder. Given what we've explored in this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
how might these ancient ideas about justice inform our understanding of fairness and responsibility in our modern world?
Yeah.
How can we apply these principles to the challenges we face in our own communities and our own lives?
It's a question worth wrestling with. Deuteronomy doesn't offer easy answers, but it does offer a starting point for these important conversations.
It reminds us that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing journey,
Right.
one that requires us to engage with difficult questions, challenge our assumptions, and strive to create a world that reflects those timeless principles of fairness, compassion, and accountability.
Well said. It's been a truly enlightening journey through Deuteronomy. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep learning.